We are teaching church history right now. We're down to basically in my generation now, and I knew a lot of these people. Our textbook in this time, I'm reading excerpts from the history of California Southern Baptist. But it's the history of all Baptists in California in all reality. This is a very important book. It says, for reference only, not to be taken from this room. This is a very rare book. Southern Baptists don't want this book printed today. They don't want you to read it because they don't believe what they wrote and what they believed at this period of time. And though it has many of them in there, prominent leaders, but they have walked off and left the most important things about being a Baptist. And I'm going to go read through here. I'm going to read the organization of some of these churches. I have pastored some of these churches. I have preached in some of these churches. I've been members of some of these churches that it's talking about here. And I've known people all over from here. The set of messages here from about 100 this way are very important in the present tense church history. We're talking about church history and the evolution of theology. Now, theology should not evolve. I try to teach in our church here what the church is taught in the first century. I try to teach the most important things. I try to teach scriptural baptism, what it actually is. I try to teach the Lord's Supper, what it actually is. I try to tell you how important church succession is, because that is Matthew 16 and 18, Matthew 28, 18 through 20. You're Peter, but upon this gigantic foundation rock I shall be building my church, and the gates of hell cannot wrestle her down, will not be able to wrestle her down, but it has. As we look through history, the gates of hell have been against God's churches all the way. The churches of the Lord Jesus Christ have had enemies from without and enemies from within. And that's exactly what Paul the Apostle fought, and Peter and James and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John told the story about the life, birth, life, death, and burial of Jesus Christ. Jesus lived this. Jesus was persecuted from within. He himself founded Judaism by giving the Mosaic law to Moses. And then the gates of hell began to twist its really gnarly, bony, wicked fingers all among, and we have the Mishnah and we have the Talmud that set aside the Word of God. And he fought with that then. Now, we're talking about here about churches in California. We talked about, in the past, we talked about the churches in Switzerland, we talked about the churches in Sweden, we talked about the churches in Russia, talked about the churches in China. We went all the way from the Middle East, all the way through time. We found out how the churches got over there into Sweden and Italy and the different places, in France. We talked about the different names that they're called: Montanists, Novatians, the Puritans, Patarines, and Cathari, the Donatists, the Paulicians. These different people were called by this. Many things have been written about them. There are different denominations or different beliefs, and some of them, some of the Donatists, some of the Montanists had different beliefs than some of those that were more sound. But they were all called Montanists, they were all called Donatists, they were all called Paulicians. Now let's go back and just review from that and come this way a little bit, so we won't forget. The churches of Asia were the ones, many of the churches in Asia, Paul founded. All the way into Rome. We find out that Islam stuck its ugly head up about 600 AD. Catholicism had begun. They began to persecute the real Christians. Catholicism are not Christians. Catholicism is not Christian. It is anti-Christian. At that period of time especially. We're going to find out here in this book here where the Catholic Church was persecuting the Baptists. And so were the Lutherans, and so were the Presbyterians, and so were the Northern Baptists also. But they were chased out by Islam, went in and took over Asia Minor. And it drove those Christians that were called Paulicians all the way up into Sweden, Switzerland, and in the valleys of the Piedmont. And they hid out in these regions, and sometimes they could stick their heads up, sometimes they could build churches, sometimes they had churches in caves or in forests or in the deep valleys. And they drove them, the Catholic Church drove them out, and from Sweden and all these other places, they drove them out into Russia and China and Germany, etc. That's where you have the Anabaptists there. They were all called Anabaptists at that time. Anabaptist is a derogatory term. And then they came to America through England mainly. They came to America, and America was not a welcoming place for Baptists at that time. The Baptists had to fight hard here for you to have religious liberty. You wouldn't have any religious liberty nowhere in the world if it hadn't been for Baptists. Simple as that. I had one of our students, Donald Grewar in Wales, repeats a lot of the messages, and he'll even write them down and put them back up in printed form, which I'm very thankful for. He's from this area where Baptists came from in the early America. They came in, we talked about going into Indiana, we talked about Ohio wilderness, we talked about the Tennessee wilderness, we talked about all of these wildernesses where Baptists went, and finally they came to the California wilderness. And I read here in the first part of this book, I think in the second class in this were the Baptist gunslingers in the Wild West, Baptist gunslingers in the Wild West, where they had to go to church and put their pistols up on the pulpit so they'd be safe, and have people, guards at the doors, and sat down in front of the room and in the back of the room with pistols or rifles or shotguns, because it was illegal for them to preach in California at death's door many times. Now, this is where I came from. This is where my teaching came from. I trace it all the way back to the seashores of Galilee, but personally, I was educated by these men, the names that I'm reading here. One of my personal teachers founded one of the first seminaries in the state of California, Dr. H.T. Hubbard. He was my Greek and Hebrew teacher. His father, M.B. Hubbard, was up there at the riverbank, up there by Modesto, where they founded a church up there. And they founded a seminary. Dr. Hubbard went from there down to Bellflower, California, and helped establish the church down there in Bellflower, which was the old Gloria Garden Church, which we are going to read about. And we already read about in this book. And he stayed there for many years, then he went back up to Fresno area. And he became the Greek and Hebrew teacher in the language department at Fresno Missionary Baptist Institute. I spent 12 years going to the seminary, 12 years. That's as much as doctors go when they go to medical school. But I earned a PhD and I earned a Doctor of Bible Languages, both. I had 9 years of Greek in class and 6 years of Hebrew in class. And I've been teaching it and studying it all my life. Baptists all the way down through the ages have exemplified the languages. They've exemplified the languages. Very important. The languages are very important. Even Doc Holliday, John Henry Holliday, went to school and studied Greek and Latin and French and English. You see in the tombstone and all that, you'll see him get up there and there's talking Latin in the one place. He could speak Latin. He was fluent in it. Very highly educated man. George Washington would not write his own speeches because he wasn't educated in the classical languages. He had someone else help him. Now let's get back to the modern times and let's understand exactly what's going on here and what we have inherited from these people. I'm going to quote another one. I'll try to sound like him, Brother Darius Sherwood Madden. When he's teaching in the seminary, he'd get up and say, "Young boys, young men, I want you to watch the Southern Baptist Convention today, because if you don't watch out, Missionary Baptist is going to be doing the same thing in 10 years. Basically, he was right. He was right. Now, Missionary Baptists and Southern Baptists were the same people one time, all the way back in the 1800s, all the way up until about 1950s. This right now, where I'm talking about, is the division of the real Baptist and make-believe Baptist. Free Will Baptists are make-believe Baptists. Northern Baptists are make-believe Baptists, basically. And now the Southern Baptists are becoming make-believe Baptists. And they began right here. But what they're going to stand for right here, I'm going to show you where the problem came in. The problem came in, as it is with many churches, is numbers. We want numbers. We want money. What is more important, money or truth? The following pastors participated in the organization of the convention: D.I. Atkinson, Arvin; R.W. Lackey, Bakersfield; Bester Wolber, Taft; J.E. Hill, Ontario; A.J. Bird, Tipton; B.H. Truheit, Sanger; Sam D. Dunham, Madeira; Sam Wilcoxon, Shafter; Dud G. Porner, Lamont; Silas Hill. Judge G. Porner was I was his pastor at one time, and when he retired, he gave this book to me. Silas Hill, Salinas; W.J. Venable, Port Chicago. Churches at Oildale and Delano were pastorless at that time. But guess what? Dud Porter had gone and built those churches. I'm going to tell you something else about all of these things. You study church history, and you're going to find out that most Baptist churches, the pastors only stayed there from 6 months to 2 years because they ran out of soap. You know what I mean when I talk about running out of soap? Because they preached everything they knew. And so they had to move on and preach everything they knew again. Now, if you look at some of these men, some of them would go and establish a church and then leave the church and leave them with a pastor. But a pastor in a church is very important. Can you imagine being a preacher's kid, a PK, at this period of time when you went from one church to the other? Your dad would be in this church here in Madeira, and then you go to Fresno, and that's next year, and you went all of these different schools all over the place. It was a migratory, transitional lifestyle, constantly. Being a preacher's kid this time was really rough because you went from church to church to church to church. Some churches in 1 year would have 3 pastors. It was a great day for California Southern Baptists. Some laughed, others cried, while still others met in groups to chat and rejoice together. For some of them it meant renewing fellowship with Southern Baptists across the land. For more recent converts it meant a greater opportunity to participate in the World Mission Program. This World Mission Program is very important to the Southern Baptist Church Convention, and the convention is sending out missionaries. That was the problem between Association and Convention Baptist. As I said, that the Baptist Convention was sending out missionaries, and it wasn't churches. Well, the churches send them out. But you know what? Money was more important to the convention than truth. And we're going to find that out pretty soon. That's why the Southern Baptists and the Missionary Baptists, or the Southern Missionary Baptists, split at this time. To others who tried to perpetrate their Baptist faith by working with landmarks and other groups, this meant the restoration of fellowship with their brethren. Every step of the ground that these people had here and made was rough ground. They had to come in and and some of the names that I'm going to read here to you: Bird, Venable, Mauser, Wilcoxon, Pointer, Lackey, Brown. These were all Blankenship. Now, I have known all these families all of this time, all of my life. I grew up with these names. I went to school with some of these. And it goes, and as you go and you study these churches and everything, it's very important for them to write down that the expenditures included stationery for $14.42, stamps $1.44, total expenditures $15.86, leaving $5.86 and $5.68 in the treasury. Money, money, money. Money is important, people, but don't get your sights off of truth. It says here that different ones, they had another convention set, and this covers from about 1939. Actually, in some ways, it go back in the 1800s, because some of these churches are that were here in California in the 1800s, and we talked about the one all the way down there in Southern California, where the preacher had to go with two Colt pistols, one on each side of his pulpit, down there in El Monte. That was 1852. Some of them we're going to study here started in the 1800s. Doug Pointer goes way back. He was born in 1898. Ben Bogard way back yonder. J.R. Graves back in the 1800s. But these men were going to California. R.G. Lee even came to California and preached. The names here, the Crow family, Bakersfield, their present membership at First Missionary Baptist Church there, the Crow family. What's left of them. They screamed and hollered that they needed a scriptural school in California. Well, the one thing about the Missionary Baptists were way ahead of the Southern Baptists in establishing a school out in California. And they were way ahead of the Southern Baptists in many ways. The Southern Baptist schools, some of the greatest, what we might call scholars in their schools, were sound Missionary Baptists. J.R. Graves, Dr. J. Lewis Guthrie, Benjamin Marcus Bogard. At the end of these classes, I'm going to read a debate between Ben Bogard and Amy Semple McPherson. I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of them, and we're going to read that debate verbatim. But we're going to go here now. A lot of these people, and I know some of these people, and some of these people were what we might call founding pastors of the churches where I've been a member. We're talking about most of these people came out here from Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Missouri, Arkansas, and they talked about them being dumb Arkies and dumb Okies and things. But basically, in some way, they were not educated. But the Missionary Baptists were sending people out here that were educated from the seminaries. They sent their seminary students, they're sending people that had gone to the seminary for 5 or 6 or 7 years. Some of the greatest teachers and evangelists were those that went to the seminary from 5 to 10 years. They founded sound churches. And remember, at this time, the Missionary Baptists and Southern Baptists had very little. The only differences they had was the convention and associations. That the American Baptist Association, which I was part of also, they began to send out missionaries from the association also, but they were all sponsored by a church. The same thing with the convention. Those things are foolishness to argue about. Of course, you have Missionary Baptists that won't. They're independent. They won't be a part of any association. Associations help you reach the gospel, preach the gospel to all over the world. It's good, not bad. W.J. Venable, Terman, Dunham, Woodward, Cunningham, G.F. Loving. G.F. Loving founded some of the first churches in Bakersfield. The church that basically, the New Hope Missionary Baptist Church that I was pastoring there, G.F. Loving was the founding pastor of the original churches that came out of. Sam Wills Coxon and Doug Pointer had established the ones in Lamont and Shafter and Taft. One time a preacher stood up in Bakersfield, and remember, he was a pastor of First Baptist Church, First Missionary Baptist Church, or First Church, what they call it there at Southgate and H. And he told the church that they didn't have a scriptural foundation at all because they came out of Taft. And he had them reorganize the church, and the one that he came out of was a Southern Baptist Church. That was a missionary Baptist out there, and this was a staunch Southern Baptist church with G.H. Loving, G.F. Loving. They didn't know where it came from. When I started pastoring New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, they wanted me to prove the lineage of that church, and I ran straight back into G.F. Loving. Now this man taught, he was a scriptural man. But what they fought over at First Church was foolishness. If they really wanted to have a more sound missionary Baptist foundation, they would have come out of Taft, not out of the Hillcrest Church or in Bakersfield, where G.F. Loving does. Mauser, W.H. Mauser, J.E. Hill, Alonzo Yancey, out of Bell Gardens. Bell Gardens was a missionary Baptist church down there in Bell Gardens, which became Bellflower Church, where California Missionary Baptist Institute was, where I was educated, partially there in Arkansas also. These people come in here and they fight over little things that don't mean anything. What really is important? Scriptural baptism and observing the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper is not a conveyance of grace. It is a memorial supper that you remember the Lord Jesus Christ. And it is to a local, visible New Testament church. Lackey was a missionary Baptist. He was a staunch man. He believed in the local New Testament church. He believed in church authority. He believed in church succession, Baptist succession. He believed in close communion, and he believed in Baptist succession, and he was against alien immersion coming from anybody who didn't have a right or authority to baptize. It talks about him on page 32. Reported that the Sunday School Board and present books to the convention for use of study materials, vacation Bible schools, and other books were bought and sold during that year. J.C. James, which I knew, was another one of their missionaries. It talks about these also all the way down through here. Now the baptism question comes up on page 33. Now, this is a very important question, but we're going to see the Southern Baptist Convention begin to skirt around it later. Not now. Now they're sound on the issue. At the meeting board held in Bakersfield, February the 17th, 1942, the financial report of Secretary Lackey, this R.W. Lackey, was approved and the authority was given to purchase an adding machine for a cost of $2.50. Editor S.E. Dunham on the board approved the appointment of the committee and to study the question receiving Northern Baptist baptism and letters recommending Northern Baptist churches. President Wilcoxon appointed Alonzo Yancey. That's the one from Bellflower, Bell Gardens. J.E. Hill, G.D. Faulkner on the committee to study the question and to bring recommendations to the board at a future meeting. Secretary Lackey's quarterly report to the board revealed that he had assisted in organizing Emmanuel Baptist Church in Dos Palos, First Southern Baptist Church in Fresno, First Southern Baptist Church in Alpine, First Southern Baptist Church in Patterson. During the 3 months period, he held revivals in Ducor, Ontario. Training schools were held in churches at Bell Gardens in Riverside. Bell Gardens is Bellflower. The Bell Gardens Church, Gloria Gardens Church, back in there. It is significant to note how many training schools and study courses were taught by Secretary Lackey. When the board of the directors met April 28, 1942, first on the agenda was a report of the committee previously appointed to study the question of Northern Baptist baptism. Northern Baptists accepted anybody's Baptist. That's ABC, American Baptist Convention. They ordained and they had women pastors at this time. All of the things that you see in modern time, the Northern Baptists were doing. They were the liberal Baptists, if you could call them Baptist at all. Baptism referred to in minutes as alien immersion. The record states that the report was adopted, that there is nothing to indicate what the report was. It is known, however, that the most of the churches in those days did not receive letters from Northern Baptist churches. But members who had been baptized by Southern Baptist pastors were usually received on statement. Some of the churches would not accept members baptized by most Northern Baptist churches because of the prevalent practice of alien immersion and open communion above Northern Baptist. That's the difference right there. That's the real question. Now, May 26, Lackey reported that California had been accepted into Fellowship of Southern Baptist Convention and the minister's retirement plan was available to California preachers through the Texas Convention. Now, before the Southern Baptist Convention would accept Californians into their fellowship and cooperative program, they wanted them to make a statement that they did not believe in open communion or alien immersion. And some of the preachers back there, when the California associations were led into it, they stood up and revolted because they said some of these people in California accept alien immersion and open communion. Now here's something extremely important. Extremely important. There was a Greenhorn Mountain Assembly. Now, I've been all over Greenhorn Mountain, haven't I, Marilyn? I took you all over Greenhorn Mountain. The convention heard with interest Dr. J.W. Bailey, a Negro missionary Baptist, an evangelist, since deceased, that sang, "When I'm Growing Old, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and "On Jordan's Stormy Banks." I would have loved to have been there to heard this, and I could have, because I was around back then. The first plea for the Baptist school in California was heard in the report in Christian Education, and what they're doing here is they're trying to compete with the missionary Baptists in California that had a school. He called into ministry the Christian colleges and states and deplored the lack of Baptist schools in California. He recommended that the Southern Baptists in California pray, labor, and pay. Pray, labor, and pay. That's always money. And these institutions which we now have may continue in their work, that we may soon have schools of our own in California to prepare our young people for the greater service of the kingdom. Brother Travis Herbert was already preaching, but they didn't want to send their preachers to these Baptist schools, missionary Baptist schools, landmark missionary Baptist schools, because they might be taught that a convention was not as sound as an association, which didn't make any sense back then at all. They shouldn't have been arguing about that at all. That wasn't the most important thing. But we're going to find out later on that begin to lay down the most important things for the lesser important things. Speaking of collection, Dr. J.W. Bailey addressed the convention and appealed for financial assistance in his work for Negroes in California. His request for aid was referred to the board of directors, but upon motion, B.H. Truitt, an offering was taken up which amounted to $32.54. This old gentleman, and you will find out he was in his 80s at this time. He died in the pulpit in Southern California preaching, an old soldier of the cross. Before the convention closed, it stressed foreign missions, lashed out at the liquor traffic, gave a rising vote of thanks to the churches of Oildale and Bakersfield, which they so royally entertained the messengers and visitors. 1942 and 1943 now. At the meeting, the board voted to continue publishing the California Southern Baptist out of subscription funds until such time as it became necessary to supplement the paper out of the state mission fund. Secretary Lackey was continued as editor with Samuel Costin and Henry Mauser. S.E. Dunham serving as an advisory committee. After voting to pay Vester Wolber $25 for preparing and publishing the minutes of the convention meeting, the board adjourned until after evening meal. When it reconvened, on a motion by B.N. Loomis, action was taken referred to on request of Dr. J.W. Bailey for funds to be used in Negro mission work. When I was a young boy and a young man, you could go down Cottonwood Road. It's called Martin Luther King Boulevard now, but you could go down Cottonwood Road, and I could count about 7 or 8 missionary Baptist, black missionary Baptist churches. And my wife was a caregiver, in-home caregiver for different people, and she had this one, Mr. Jones, which I'm sure he wouldn't, he's now gone on to be with the Lord. That was the best, most gracious, wonderful one of your patients that you ever work with, I'm sure. Isn't it, Mary, right? Yeah? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. He treated you like a human being, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I sent some barbecued ribs to him one time, if I remember right. And you could go out there about once a month in these black Baptist churches, and they'd have a dinner. And you could go in there, you could buy these ribs, you could have these barbecued ribs or barbecued chicken, you could buy it, or you could go there and eat it. And this is what I call black Baptist barbecues. And I asked her to ask him if he knew what a black Baptist barbecue was, and what he laughed real loud, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Because he knew what it was, didn't he?
Yes.
That goes way back. Well, Dr. Bailey had something to do with all of this. And all of these people being saved, all these little churches. And he was the doctor. On the motion to C.W. Holmes and Orville Sanders, W.H. Mauser, R.W. Lackey were named as a special committee to investigate property near Fresno as a possible site for a children's home. They were skirting around this man, Bailey, all the time. They'd spend thousands of dollars on everything else. They'd give him $13 or $30 when he came forward. He was always there at all of these, trying to get help to propagate the gospel among the Negro people. Now, the Northern Baptists were giving Southern Baptists a real hard time in California. Northern Baptists, basically, we were very liberal, not even really, as you could really call, they weren't really Baptist. They didn't believe in Baptist succession, they didn't believe in scriptural baptism, they didn't believe in close communion, they didn't believe in all the Baptist things that Baptists believe in. Secretary Lackey, this is on page 41, Lackey read proposed articles of incorporation which the board approved. Obviously, the question of comity agreements between Northern and Southern Baptists was being cited by some Northern Baptists who didn't want Southern Baptists in California at all. You know, the thing about it is, when you preach the truth, people get convinced. And if you're living in error, they don't want anybody to come back what they teach. Like the Catholic Church didn't want anybody to have a Bible in their hand. The Church of England wanted their people to have a Bible in their hands, but they wanted to have one that was interpreted the way they wanted to. That's what you call the King James Bible. That was printed and translated for the Church of England, not for Baptist people. Not for Baptists, but the Church of England. Baptismal regeneration, all this. Now, therefore, G.H. Woodward secured approval of a motion authorizing the publication of special edition of the 10 California Baptist of the special edition of the California Southern Baptist containing all previous agreements between the Southern Baptists and Northern Baptists with respect to territory. Basically, they told the Northern Baptist Convention, jump the creek. We're going to do what the Lord wants us to do. We're going to evangelize the world. We're going to go out and evangelize the world. Then we have the third annual meeting in 1943 and 1944. And again, we have the same one. It says here that the Golden Gate Church was an old church which repudiated the Northern Baptist Convention and voted to cooperate with the Southern Baptists. The First Baptist Church in Oildale. You've been there, Maryland. In order to attend Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. Their pastor had resigned. And the F.W. Carter, pastor of the Southern Missionary Baptist Church in Delano. This one was founded by who? Doug Pointer. Vice President elected the Holman, the First Southern Baptist Church in Long Beach. It talks about here. They tried to unseat Lackey. Lackey was a landmark sympathizer because he believed in strict, close communion and to guard your baptism. No alien immersion. They tried to get rid of him sometime. It says here, in this time 20 new churches were reported by the time the minutes were printed, and were 52 cooperating churches in all. Again now, doctrinal issues were discussed. Getting back to the meeting of the convention and the report of the board of directors, interesting to note that the board in its report recommended a constitutional change which was aimed at tightening the doctrinal traces on the Baptist gospel wagon. While no copy of the proposed amendment seems to have been preserved, it is known that the board recommended a constitutional change which would have barred churches from fellowship with the convention if they practice open communion or received what is regarded as most Southern Baptists as alien immersion. After long and heated debate now, there was liberals in here too. That's who was opposing this. The convention decided the amendment was unconstitutional. Since Article 3, Section 1 stated the convention will have no ecclesiastical authority over power whatsoever and shall never assume ecclesiastical authority or power whatsoever, or to write creeds or to exercise judicial or legislative control over churches. In the lieu of the proposed amendment, R.E. Davis suggested that a resolution be passed which would put the convention on record as being opposed to open communion and alien immersion. They were still trying to be Baptist. On page number 47 now, in 1943 session, the convention were characterized by more than the usual number of sermons. The annual sermon was preached by G.F. Loving, pastor of the First Southern Baptist Church in Bakersfield. And that's where the First Baptist Church reorganized out of, and New Hope Missionary Baptist Church reorganized out of. Now let's see how many minutes we got on this. I went a little further than I wanted to. I'm trying to, in these messages, trying to show you what is important in Baptist ranks and what is not important in Baptist ranks. The not important things are associations and conventions. Both of them send out missionaries, and they pay missionaries. But they all do it by the authority of a New Testament church. The real important things is the real doctrinal issues, but you'll see this doctrinal issue softening as we go, and it's going to get real disgusting in a little while as we go on. Our Father, we send this message out to show that even Baptists have evolution of theology in some places. They shouldn't, but they do. Father, please use this message for your honor and glory. Please forgive me for our failure. In Jesus'